Can I ask committee members to take their seats, please? Okay. Director Acton, will you join us, please? Okay, here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of Wednesday, May the 2nd. I'd like to begin by noting that this meeting is taking place in the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. And before you, we have the agenda that was published. I've got a couple of items I'd like to amend this to pull item R6. We have a new business item, Cow Bay Cleanup Day, and I would like to move UB2 up until after all the other grant aid requests to just following C6. So could I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Director Clement, seconded by Director Marcotte. Is there any discussion on those items? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We have minutes of the April 18th meeting. Could I have a motion to approve? Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Clement. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Those opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Blackwell, is there any business arising from those minutes?
No business arising from the minutes.
Thank you. Next to item 4 on the agenda, public input period, in which everyone that would like will have 3 minutes to provide input to the committee on items on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I start speaking, my timer starts. Somebody's left their notepad up here. I don't know if it's of importance to them. I'll just move it. Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I would like to speak to item R8, Delegation of Authority for Development Permit. The stated purpose of this bylaw amendment is to increase consistency within the Development Services Division, streamlining the method for processing specified development permits is recommended. Efficiencies in processing time will benefit the development community and landowners. What this proposed bylaw amendment does is leapfrog the OCP harmonization process by harmonizing the electoral area development permit guidelines, thereby altering the 10 OCPs without community consultation. It removes the public's ability to comment on development permits without variance, Board of Variance applications. Does the CVRD have a Board of Variance? And special event temporary use permits. It further diminishes the ability of the electoral area directors from the right and responsibility to uphold the community or the OCP of their area and representation of their home communities and engagement of their constituents. On page 2 of the staff report, there's an algorithm that suggests the bogging down of the application begins with the referral to the APCs. It has been my experience as an APC chair that the applicants are most frustrated at how long it has taken the application to the APC. This document unfairly and unjustly depicts the APCs as being a bottleneck in the application process. At the last EASC meeting, the chair agreed that each APC was a cross-representation of the public duly appointed and endorsed by the board. This proposed bylaw would limit the APC's representation to the non-technical aspects of an application to site design, landscaping, form, and design. Where would the community of Shawnigan Lake be without the determined efforts of the community members, many of whom serve on the Shawnigan Residents Association, the Shawnigan Basin Society, Directors Research Group, and the Area B APC in the contaminated soil fight? With no disrespect intended, I would suggest that many of these members are equally, if not more qualified than many of the CVRD staff to review technical data. As individual directors, I'm sure you have your own teams that assist you. The efforts of these community-based groups were directly responsible for the professional reliance role model review. Unfortunately, we know that sometimes professionals do make errors.
You're out of time. Are you almost finished?
I am. Thank you.
Please wrap up.
Unfortunately, we know that sometimes professionals do make errors that are not caught during the government, either provincial or local review processes. Community members have time to review, and in many cases, the expertise to take a detailed look at development permit applications, supplementing the work of the land use services staff. This proposed bylaw, as written, abdicates the rights and responsibilities of the director and community to have a say in how our communities develop to the general manager of land use services. Whether at the ESC board or other CVRD committee meetings, we hear the directors talk about the importance of community engagement. The recommended resolution has given you and the community mere days to consider its implications. Please do not abdicate your responsibilities to and the public's right to be consulted by endorsing this bylaw amendment as written. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for the extension.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. Mr. Chair, on today's agenda, R9 is the long-awaited soil deposit bylaw. And I see that the manager of inspections and bylaw enforcement is looking for the endorsement of this committee today to get the tools and get the permission and to get the resources to finally get on with this job. A lot of people in the CVRD are really waiting for this bylaw, and it is up to this committee today to pass it on to the board and to give Mr. Conway the tools he needs to get it going. Would this committee please give this real consideration and endorse this today to give Mr. Conway the tools to complete his job? Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to provide some input to the committee today?
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
My name is Diane Allen from Cobble Hill. Mr. Chairman, all of you, thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a few words. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment on Cobble Hill Event Society's application for another $12,000. To date, Cobble Hill Events has received over $40,000 in grant funding over a 2-year period without public approval. Today's request, if approved, would bring the total to $52,000. 2 new groups have recently formed in Cobble Hill as spin-offs. They too requested substantial funding in the form of grants. One was denied through the regional grant, the other was approved as an area grant. There are additional costs to the community when supporting these functions that are not being accounted for: toilet facilities, garbage removal, wear and tear. The costs have been taken in from the community parks budget and not identified as a cost to host these various events. The community is also expected to provide better accommodations, such as better venue in the form of a band shell, greener grass, more porta potties, more parking, more shaded picnic tables, to name a few. Note the layout plan of the Cobble Hill Common as proposed by Cobble Hill Event Society. This is a requirement of the Local Government Act that public grants fill a need in the community and for oversight of the spending. My question, what is the need and where is the oversight? Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else care to comment today? I'll ask another time. Does anyone else want to provide comment? Seeing none, thank you very much. We'll go on to the next item, and we are now at number 5, delegations in regards to BC Parks Management Plan for the Cowichan River Park. Who do we have presenting for us today? Welcome to the lectern. The red light's on. Could you?
May I move this?
No. I saw
Okay, there.
looks of shock over there. And if you could just orient the microphone to you so that the people at home can hear. And you have 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, my name is Jim O'Donnell, and I am from Satlam. And I am part of a group of residents from Glenora, Satlam, and North Cowichan who have formed the Cowichan River Neighborhood Association. Our association is challenging the BC Parks decision to issue a long-term permit to the Cowichan Fish and Game Association inside the Cowichan River Provincial Park. This is the only shooting range in BC Parks. I am speaking to you today because the CVRD is listed as a stakeholder in the proposed management planning process for the Cowichan River Park and protected areas. I would like to give you a brief history of the long-standing residential opposition to the noise of shooting at the range and the corresponding involvement of the CVRD in that opposition. I would also like to bring your attention to the important recent developments, notably serious lead issues and bullets leaving the range. Before I do that, though, I would like to respond to 2 of the statements made by club members over the years. "We were here first" is something we often hear. And my answer is that before the range existed, our properties were privately owned. These owners were not consulted, and the club was not granted rights over what the owners or subsequent owners could do or not do with their properties. The club is not registered on title like the Enan Railway, and I have no knowledge that the club existed when I moved my property in 1979. Furthermore, the club is not the same as it was then, as there's been some serious change in its focus since inception. The law today does not grant prior rights. In a BC Supreme Court decision regarding the Salt Spring Rod and Gun Club, the judge noted that many people move there for the peace and quiet, and the fact that the gun club found itself bordering small acreage residential neighborhoods required it to change with the character of the neighborhood. He concluded that the shooting as currently practiced is considered a nuisance. "You are against guns" is another statement. This is a land use and public safety issue and no more. Some of our members actually are active hunters. Now for the history. In 1974, the activities of the club were designated legal non-conforming by the CVRD. Membership was at about 80. In 1980, a petition of 117 signatures was presented to the CVRD, and residents were objecting to the noise of the club and protesting the recent rezoning application. The planning department stated at the time that "you should be aware that this office, the previous director, and Director Ayers have received a considerable amount of opposition to the proposal in the form of letters and petitions. The gun club was denied rezoning then, but also in 1984 and in 1994. Some statements from those rezoning applications were, The board does not consider the shooting range in keeping with the emerging nature of Glenora and Satlam. Director Taylor, I think for the benefit of all concerned, it would be best if an alternate location for the club was found. The problem of noise from the shooting range has been a long one. Planning Department comment. The club has declined to do a noise abatement study to the satisfaction of the board. And the CVRD also noted that as the area on both sides of the river is growing and becoming more residential, the local residents' concerns over noise will no doubt increase. And finally, a letter from the Ministry of Forests to the CVRD regarding the 94 application stated, "We are concerned that the potential increased activity and noise may have an impact on the Cowichan River Park proposal." So in 1995, the Cowichan River Park was established. And in 2003, the purpose statement and zoning plan stated that the primary role of the Cowichan Provincial River Park is to protect the natural values associated with a scenic and world-renowned salmon-bearing river. Today, the CVRD has no jurisdiction, except as a stakeholder, in the Cowichan River Provincial Park Management Plan. When the area became a provincial park, residents believed that the noise would soon end or be reduced, because an active and growing gun range wouldn't be a good fit in a provincial park or do anything to the natural values. In 2015, our last available figure, club membership grew to 514 members with a total of 727 people, including families. Membership was growing at about 10% a year. Our association became directly involved with parks when we realized that there was no formal park management plan in place, nor was there one planned in the future when we started our discussions. The regional manager, Don Cadden, seemed to believe that his role was that of mediator with the club and the residents, and a process that hasn't really proven effective at all. Our association began a strong series of written requests for park management planning and attention to possible lead contamination, which has finally led to the beginning of the park management planning process. In addition, parks held 2 site investigations for environmental impact of lead and other materials and found significant impact from heavy metal contamination. They had found contamination at over 90 times the acceptable level from bullets, fracturing and leaching lead oxide into the soil. This soil is now classified as toxic and is poisonous to invertebrates, small mammals, and children. Incredibly, this in a world-class park, protected area beside a heritage river. And most importantly, we have a serious concern for our and public safety, as we have discovered and documented what we suspected all along. Bullets are leaving the range area and going out into park property. The ones we have found are striking trees. The ones that miss could travel 4 to 5 kilometers, endangering park users and residents. Even though we have recently established that spraying bullets is concerned, BC Parks has allowed the daily use of the range and has not closed and haven't closed it except for putting up warning signs. Now, there are some residents here that would say that the loud gunfire is completely contrary to the intent of the newly. They're saying that the shooting range has no place in a park dedicated to the natural values associated with a scenic and world-renowned salmon-bearing river. And then we also have other residents that feel that if the noise is greatly reduced by a reduction in hours and the elimination of loud weapons or by shooting indoors, that they would be satisfied, as long as the lead contamination and hazard of overshooting is addressed. In a CVRD survey, some trailhead park users have noted loud guns and their incompatibility with a children's playground and a family barbecue shelter. Some equestrians will not use the park because the shooting startles the horses. Even though the club installed abatement devices to reduce sound, residents are still adversely affected, and the shotguns which are fired closest to the trailhead park have no abatement installed at all. The trailhead should be very important to the CVRD, being the gateway to the Cowichan River Provincial Park. The gun activity as it now exists is not compatible with a regional park that had 42,000 visitors in 2017. We have kept Area E Director Allison Nicholson well informed about the ongoing situation and our attempted solutions and concerns.
Jim, you've got a minute and a half left.
Yep. In conclusion, I would like to point out before finishing that the loud gunfire is completely contrary to the intent of the newly developing OCP for Area E. This is a democratic document that is valuing peace and quiet as the #1 priority for residents. Our group is asking the regional district to strongly assert their role in the park management planning process and support our community concerns that a gun range does not belong in an environmentally protected area and park. Thank you. If any of the directors would like additional information, I can hand it out. And I also have pictures of the bullets that are embedded in the trees if they're interested.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Director Nicholson?
Yeah, I don't have a question. I have a couple of comments. I think I really appreciate the work that the community is doing on this issue. Area E has its more than its fair share of noise issues, for sure. But I really think that it's just another example of an instance where the community has not been adequately consulted and their views taken into account over a period of years. And they're bearing the brunt of it, and they have valid and concerning questions that I think warrant to be answered. And I appreciate greatly their perseverance and patience, really patience, the last couple of years trying to work with the province to resolve this issue and the gun club. It's been really amazingly difficult. So just thank you very much, Jim, and your team.
Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you to Jim. Our family they are hunters, and in order for their license, they need to scope they have to go and do whatever they have to do for their guns, and so it serves a service to those who are hunters and families that have been doing it for a long time. My question is, as indoors, so that would make your group happy if they went indoors. Could you tell me, and that is a possibility, and can you tell me if when did this lead issue come up? I've just heard it recently on the radio, but you've always known that it's 90 times the lead in that area?
No, we only found out about it in late 2017, somewhere around 2017. Yeah. But the thing is, our research told us that it was there because it's endemic to any gun range. It's a common problem. So in 2018, or actually late 2017, I believe, Parks commissioned an environmental study, and that was done in early 2018, and that's when they found out about the toxicity of the soil.
Okay, so just to follow up, Mr. Chair, thank you. So in the estuary, we have those issues as well. And the lead in the duck hunting has been changed to something else, I believe, right? Because that was an issue that fish and in the habitat and stuff like that were. So they've changed their practices. But what I also see is I pick up all the plastic wads. Wads used to be paper. So if they could eliminate the lead, but I get a lot of concern as well. So the areas are changing. There should be more discussion. I get a lot of concerns. People are walking on Cowichan Bay Road, and there's the duck hunting that's facing them. That is not that's Ducks Unlimited land, and hunting is prohibited with Ducks Unlimited. So, yeah, I could see, like Director Nicholson said, that this needs to be a communication, a two-way of being able to resolve this, that people can carry on with what they need to do, with what they do in their spare time and what a lot of people do to feed their families. So, indoors could be a discussion that the province could help, but I imagine the cost, but then you say they have 514, they have a lot of members. Mm-hmm. So, yes. Yeah, it is something, seems to me, that it's communication.
May I respond?
What year did they open the gun club?
Well, we have different reports, but the last one we heard, Jeff Maxwell said 1960 on the environmental report, but we've heard accounts that it was earlier, much earlier.
Thank you.
Director Dory?
Yeah, my question is, what was there first, the gun range or the park?
The gun range
Yeah, okay,
on Crown land.
yeah. And 4 to 5 kilometers away with a bullet in a tree?
From my information, certain rifles will shoot a bullet at least 4 kilometers. Now, I'm not saying that they're all shooting that far,
Yeah,
because there's different kinds of weapons being used.
okay, thank
Director Acton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is more of a question for yourself or for Mr. Blackwell. People come in, they come as a delegate and present their problems, and the director has affirmed that it is an issue that perhaps she'd like some support on. How do we ensure that this comes up again at the committee level, or that we look at it?
I would suggest that it would be appropriate to ask staff to provide some background information, and it can be discussed as to what actions could take place and be put on a future agenda. Director Nicholson?
I think that what we're looking for today is confirmation that the CVRD is going to actively be a stakeholder in the Cowichan River Management Plan process, which has started, and I brought it to Brian Farquhar's attention, so I'm hoping that that is going to happen, and if I need to make a motion to that effect, I will.
I think, do we have any details as to the input period for the plan? I heard a date, June 8th, so that would be very short timelines. Looking to Mr. Blackwell, who's looking to Ms. Soroka. Do you have something you could add to this discussion? No? Please come to the lectern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The process, I have gone through the website and I have made contact with the park planner. So I have not received any response back yet, but I am working on getting some contact with her.
So it's not the practice of this committee and this organization to generally entertain resolutions on delegations' presentation, but I think we've got enough information to ask staff to provide us with some more background when it becomes available, and we've got time in the next meeting is in 2 weeks, that if we could have some information brought forward, that would be appreciated. Thank you. And thank you very much to the delegate. That was very good information. Next item on our agenda is correspondence. Mr. Blackwell, I turn to you. You've got, I think, 6 items plus UB2 as well. C1.
So C1, the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area A, Millbay Malahat, in the amount of $500 be provided to South Cowichan Volleyball Club to support growth and expansion.
Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. C2.
Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to Honeymoon Bay Community Society to support the Bay Days Show and Shine and Community Potlick Dimmer Christmas Gathering.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Clement. Any discussion? There's a great story behind that. Call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. C3.
Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $7,500 be provided to Cowichan Lake and District Chamber of Commerce to assist and support the area visitor center services.
Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed, the motion carries. C4.
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $5,000 be provided to Kaikuse Volunteer Fire Department to support critical services provided in the West Cowichan Lake area.
Moved by Director Clement, seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. C5.
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $1,200 be provided to the Cowichan Lake Lady of the Lake Society to support the Ambassador Program and travel for Cowichan Lake royalty.
Moved by Director Clement, seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion? Director Acton.
Could you just expand a little bit on the ambassador program, how it's laid out exactly?
Certainly I could. Each year, the Cowichan Lady Lake Society has a program in which they invite grade 11 students to participate in a pageant program, and there is, I believe, 4 positions where the winners of those categories participate in the touring and the likes, and they also participate in the BC Ambassador Program, which is across the province, and they go to various events and meet with other royalty and other ambassadors, and they are ambassadors for our community to other regions of the province, and I think they even get down into Washington State. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And those opposed? Motion carries. C6.
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to Vancouver Island Wind Sports Society to support and promote the world-class Windfest event at Nitnat Lake in 2018.
Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Clement. Is there any discussion? I will just note that we get great PR. They hang a CVRD banner up, and it's very much appreciated. It's a great event, and I would encourage other electoral area directors to consider a grant and aid from their community grant and aid budgets. Director Davis.
Just wondering if you happen to know the dates offhand. July
It's
sometime.
on the website, and it's a great video. It's second weekend in July, I believe. That's last year's. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And those opposed? The motion carries. UB2, Mr. Blackwell.
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $12,000 be provided to Cobble Hill Event Society to support public events.
Moved by Director Clement, seconded by. We have a seconder. It's by Director Marcotte. Discussion. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will not be voting for this at all. I have heard another community's issues, but I've been hearing them for a while, and they have legitimate concerns. Normally, with a grant and aid, it's the director's prerogative. We look at it and see if it makes sense. We also should be asking questions sometimes, and a lot of times we don't around this table. And I feel that the concerns that I've heard are very well-founded, and that I will not be voting in favor of this grant and aid for those reasons.
Thank you. Got Director Acton and Director Davis.
Thank you. I've heard the community's concerns, but I have to say that this is actually a really great event, and it does create some really good community involvement, and it's ongoing, and it's actually putting Cobble Hill on the map a little bit. So, and I know that a lot of people from Shawnigan attend, and unfortunately I would like to contribute more, but I hadn't planned on it and have a bit of a reserve fund in case something else comes up. But from Shawnigan Lake, I would like to contribute $1,000, whether Director Clement would like that to be on top or lower his. So, thank you. Can I do that today, or how
Nope,
would I do
you're
that?
gonna have to provide appropriate
Okay,
documentation
so
through
I can do
staff
that
for
the
the
next
next
time,
meeting.
but Director Clement can decide whether he wants to lower his or not.
We've got Director Davis, followed by Annie DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and having been to a number of the Music in the Park events over the last couple of years, it's been quite amazing to see the number of young people who actually come out and they bring their kids and they all run rampant, and it's been quite amazing. I gave $1,000 from Area A in 2017, and I'll be doing that again in 2018.
Thank you. Director, I'll come back to you. Director Nicholson hasn't spoken yet, so Director Nicholson?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm all for community stuff. I guess what I would ask through you to Director Clements is whether you've had any opportunity to evaluate the benefits to the community, apart from bringing the community together and having a good time, if there being sort of obvious economic development benefits, and whether you've got plans to make this a more self-sustaining in the future. Because I anticipate this will, sort of a business case for keeping this going is going to be important if it's truly a valuable community asset.
Go to Director Clement to respond.
Yeah, I spoke about that in the last EASC meeting, where you'll notice that there was $20,000 in the first 2 years each year for the Event Society to do this, and this year it has been reduced. And part of that is that they are applying for grants in other places, whether it's the BC Lottery Corporation, whether it's our own CBRD Arts and Culture grant program. They are looking for funding in different areas, and I have said very clearly that I'm not a big fan of handing out year after year grant and aids. Something like this requires a little bit of seed money, and it has grown from, I think Carrie Davis was there the first day where there were 70 people, and now we're up to 400 people. And definitely those 400 people, when it comes to economic development, are learning about the new shops that are opening up in Cobble Hill Village. They are ordering food from the pub there. The pub is definitely very happy, and they will be assisting with sponsorship this year as an example. And I think that's part of the sustainable model, whether the community comes together and says, hey, we want to create a function for this, or whether it looks like a corporate model. We'll have to take that into consideration for next year. This year, there have been a reduced number of acts due to the smaller grant. There won't be a full summer like there was last year. So anything that adds up basically will just add another show to the roster. So, and I'd just like to speak to the question of community building and how important that is, because I'm watching kids and families come together, and kids who otherwise just stay in their own communities of George Bonner School or Middle Bay School or wherever it might be are now getting to know each other. Our community is becoming more tight-knit and more resilient, and families are definitely expressing that consideration to me. And the story that touches me is one of our volunteers comes and volunteers, and he has 2 sons who are 12 and 10, and his father, who's quite elderly, has become frail and is living with him. And he looks forward to that every single week, to get out where his father gets to sit on his stroller, watch his grandkids run around, and watch his son be part of the community. And this is something that he never got to experience while he lived in Victoria. And so this is an all age, all aspects free event that is costing a few bucks per household. And I hear those parts about needing to find a sustainable model, and I assure you that I'm working with Chess to try and find what those are, and they are looking for alternative funding. So I think this is a great thing to sponsor, and we'll look at it in the upcoming years about how to fund it.
Thank you. Director Yanni DiNardo.
I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to refer this back so that the community can speak about this and talk about the benefits, and if there's economic benefits, and they have an opportunity to share their voice in it, because that's we are hearing from many people that I haven't heard from before on this. So I would like to see that there is a community meeting, at least they can discuss this and hear that if there is that economic benefit and all of that, and it's really valuable and how many people are coming out, that it's just a good thing to communicate. So I'd like to refer, if it's possible, back to the community so that they could have a voice in this because of all of the letters that we've been getting.
Motion to refer. Is there a seconder? See no seconder. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like to speak for myself that the grant and aid is a really valuable tool to be able to bring stuff back to your community, whereas we don't have a municipal function per se like the municipalities do. So if there's ever an emergency or a small group wanting to start to do something, that you have that leverage and you have the ability to just bring small change to your community. And it's really a thing that we really struggle with here, and we try and have. So having that grant and aid is not taken lightly, but it is something that I would not want to to abuse or to take away from other directors, because it is very valuable.
Director Dory.
Thank you. I haven't been to the event. I've heard a bit about it. I've noticed the numbers climbing, and I commend Director Clement for stepping out and promoting social development in his community. In the end, it will be determined whether it's a real success or just a success, or might want to cut back or promote or whatever. But at least it started, at least there are people involved, and at least it's an opportunity for people in the community to get together, to trade stories, to look face to face with their neighbor and others, to do things that give the community an identity and also give the people a sense of place. It would be easy for a director to sit back, not do anything different, and get reelected. But this is stepping out beyond the normal, so that you are going to get criticism anytime there's a new change or a difference in the way things happen. You will get criticism. But eventually it'll all sort itself out, and in the end, I think it'll be a very good thing for Cobble Hill. And it's certainly worth going ahead with and seeing where it gets. Thank you.
Director Yanni DiNardo, something new I'm trusting, and to close.
Yes. I'm Area D, for instance, we only have $15,000, so that's my total for the year. It's a subsidy for 500 here for different things to subsidize different things that are happening in your community. And later on in this meeting, you'll see what we did with the Cowichan Bay cleanup. But I think that there's a large group, and I know that you have a seniors lunch, a very valuable seniors lunch, and a lot of seniors are finding it hard and struggling with paying their taxes, and they go up quite a bit, and they'd like to have some say in how that is being spent. I just think that that's a large amount for one time, and I will not be voting for this, and I think that it's something that the community should have more input on. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kuhn. You haven't commented yet, so I'll give you the floor, and we'll close after that.
Yeah, I'd just like to get an explanation. I read that your alternate was paid with those funds. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Director Clement.
Yeah, there's a Vancouver Island homesteading fair that occurs, which requires a lot of coordination. And Carolyn was someone in the community who was interested in taking it up. And she had done, in her former life in Squamish, she was the farmers market coordinator, and so she had experience with this. She did that for many years, and so coordinating this kind of event was very natural to her. And so it was just a stipend to be able to cover some of her time and expenses that she had.
Thank you, and just a final comment. Driving in this morning, I heard a public service announcement on the radio about homesteading fair coming up, so hope it's well attended. Look, no more hands in the air. I am going to call the question. Everybody knows what's before you. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. For everyone's information, this and other items that move through committee will be at the board meeting on Wednesday, May the 9th. Next, any information items, Mr. Blackwell?
There are no information items.
Thank you. So, in section 8, we have reports R1. Mr. Munn, would you please come and present for us, please?
Good afternoon. Afternoon, Chair, committee members, members of the public and staff. Not sure what's happening there. I think we're okay. Today I've got two applications to present. The first one is a bit of a challenge to keep brief. You may have noticed by multiple attachments, I believe about 19 in all. But in the sum of it, the application is fairly straightforward. So you might bear with me a little bit. All right. Now, the application is for a development permit, 350 Stebbings Road. And that is located in, as you can see, Area B, a fair distance south of Shawnigan Lake. But it's also adjacent to Shawnigan Creek, which is a tributary of the lake. So, as I said, it's going to be a challenge to be brief, but the beginning of this started back, I believe, 2015, 14, I could be corrected there. I should mention that the applicant and the owner are both here, if any questions can be put toward them, and I believe the applicant can present briefly about some technical details. One thing, just to set the stage, is you can see the property there and the location of Shawnigan Creek. We'll come back to an aerial view in a minute. The zoning for the property is in the RR2 zone, which has a particular section that's regarding lot size, where lot size may be decreased in exchange for amenity contributions. And in this case, a 4-hectare lot size minimum may be reduced to what's proposed here, which is a 2-hectare size minimum for 3 proposed lots. So I'll go into detail about that. The OCP requires a development permit, and the guidelines that apply fall into 3 areas. Landscape, rainwater, and environmental protection is the first. Riparian protection is the second, and wildlife interface is the third. As I mentioned, this is a 10-hectare property that has proposed subdivision into, I'm not sure if you can, I don't have a pointer here, but this is also in your package. You can see the red outline site there, and I'm afraid it's a bit faint, but there's 2 lots off Stebbings Road and a 3rd lot off Goldstream Heights Drive. And we can get into that if you have questions. Those 3 lots are about 2 hectares each, and the remainder would be about 3.8 hectares. The landscape around here is largely perhaps 3rd growth forest. It's been logged once or twice at least. And as a result, some of the water drainage in the area is quite diffuse, and whereas water may be absorbed by trees and vegetation before, it's not so much now. So there are water issues. So in this application, let me just see here, we'll look at some photos, but I'll just go through a couple of the details after looking at a general view here. So the first one, This was taken in February, looking west from Goldstream Heights Drive. So at the very top of the property, looking west. And then down off Stebbings Road is the existing house. Obviously, that was taken earlier. And these photos show Stebbings Road and the driveway on the left that was created, which was part of the initiation of this application. What happened was the owner intended to create a subdivision and did some preliminary work to create access to this property, which is the driveway going up the bank there. And because of the diffuse water issues, water came down and there was some silt borne in the water from erosion that then went through this culvert that you can see on the right there. And that culvert goes through to Shawnigan Creek. So that's when the problem was noted. I'm going to go back here a couple slides just so we can get our bearings a bit more. Okay, so there's another drawing that Patrick, the applicant, may bring up here that describes this a little bit better. But just describing the complicated water issue, you'll know that there are streamside protection areas when you're considering a riparian application. There are 7 so-called SPIAs in this application. The first one is at Shawnigan Creek, which would be on the left. You can see the outline of the creek. The next one, sorry I don't have a pointer here. The next one is the tributary of Shawnigan Creek wetland. And that's more toward the center where you see lot 16, adjacent to that section there. There's a wetland where this tributary flows through. It's actually marked in green. And the next SPIA has to do with the small creek flowing through that wetland down to Stebbings Road. It goes in a culvert under the road and then across and joins Shawnigan Creek. The fourth SPIA is Stebbings Road the side of Stebbings Road, which is actually flowing into the ditch where you saw on the photograph there. The fifth is up on Goldstream Heights. There's a ditch in Goldstream Heights, which is also considered part of drainage and a SPIA. The sixth is the driveway drainage channel, which is easier seen on the photo on the left here. When you can see that U shape in the center of the photograph, that's where a driveway was created, or an access, and water flowed down there. From the top right of that photograph, it says depressional area, and that was a small wetland that collected drainage from that plateau area. And because there was some disturbance below that, water flowed down the driveway and essentially created that first problem. So that driveway drainage channel is included as a SPIA. And the last one is related to an adjacent wetland, which is actually mostly on lot 18, which is adjacent to the north. So if you look at the slide, the red outline lot, you can see above there it says lot 18, and just to the right of those words, or the lot description, is a wetland that extends slightly into lot 17. And so the SPIA is created around that area. So in total, the response measures suggested by the qualified environmental professional have largely been undertaken, and the main reason for continuing measures, the main issues are fencing and signage. The fencing will be for protection of the SPIA area SPR areas themselves, and silt fencing to avoid silt going into the water course when construction or soil movement takes place. The key to this is monitoring, and the qualified environmental professional here, who is also the applicant, has a prescribed checklist and photo method to make it as easy as possible for future house builders and owners to comply with these agreements. You should note here that the house construction, because it is fairly large properties, the houses may not be located within 30 meters of these SPIAs within an assessment area. So they may not trigger a future development permit, and therefore the streamside measures may not be undertaken for house construction. We don't know until those are presented. So in that case, some insurance has been included here in the recommendation in regards to bonding related to streamside protection monitoring in the amount of $1,500 per additional lot. So the goal is a proper functioning condition of Shawnigan Creek and its tributaries. Part of that will include native species landscaping and xeriscaping on future lots. That's largely dependent on future owners. One set of guidelines I haven't addressed is wildfire guidelines, and they are largely addressed. I didn't see any issues arising there. They're addressed in attachment Q. I also should mention that the Advisory Planning Commission recommended approval of this application. I'll just move on to the recommendation. And that is, it be recommended to the board that development permit application number 10B17DP at 360 Stebbings Road be approved with the following requirements. Compliance, I'm not sure how that happened.
Don't worry about reading the resolution out yet, because I think there may be questions from the committee for you before we get to the recommendation. Questions for staff from committee? Okay. Oh, Director Acton, go ahead.
Thank you. I wrote down a few. First, the applicant is an important community member and has helped us in many ways in our community. But unfortunately, lots don't stay with the owner. So I know that Steve would do the right thing for some of this riparian area. So my questions are around mostly that. So I'm wondering, do the SPIA areas have riparian protection? Is that the 30 meters you talked about? And that triggers a development permit? Or I always thought it was 15 meters. So 15 meters from some of these tributaries, would that, how would that work?
The regulation requires that when a SPIA is determined to exist, 30 meters from the natural boundary, or in some cases the bank of a ravine, that is the assessment area. And then an assessment is made to determine the width of the SPIA that is within there. It could be 30 meters, it could be whatever is required. So the SPIA distances after the assessment will vary in their width.
Okay, and can you tell me who owns lot 16? Is that?
I don't have the name of the owner.
Parkland or anything part of it, okay. The part that you mentioned, the $1,500, the monitoring, who does that monitoring? And the $1,500 deposit is to the CVRD?
Yes, that's to ensure that monitoring is continued. We don't know when houses will be constructed on these 3 lots. The application is really in response to subdivision. So they applied for subdivision, and this development permit is a condition of subdivision. So Whether those buildings will trigger another development permit is up in the air, which I mentioned. So this is really just addressing the present circumstance and for insurance that to encourage and basically to encourage future owners to continue that monitoring when construction occurs and erosion is created by that construction, that they can get that money back after the monitoring is done. And that's a minimal cost for
Okay, sorry,
monitoring.
and can those agreements, the monitoring agreements that you're talking about, can those go on title so that it's part of a covenant? So that it has more,
It can be associated
legs
with
to
the
it?
covenant on title, yes.
and so are you, you haven't suggested any covenants?
I did suggest a covenant.
What's,
Uh,
did I miss it?
Actually, I just suggested a bond. I discussed covenant in the report.
So if we wanted to suggest a covenant for example, for lot number 2, can we do that?
You could.
Because I know the QEP pointed out at the APC meeting that it was a highly important amphibian habitat, and it would be,
Oh,
there was
actually-
nothing actually protecting, and it would be quite shameful if somebody just came along and
Right.
dumped gravel in it, and there was really nothing protecting it in that way.
I'm sorry. Part 2 of the recommendation is a covenant. Covenant be registered on title of the subject property, so that's the property now. When it would be subdivided, that would flow on to, or continue on the additional lots that are created.
And
So
the
it'd be
covenant would
overall.
lay out these SPIA
And it
areas.
would be regarding the compliance with the development permit conditions. And addition to that would be a security amount.
Okay.
Thank you. I've got myself next, followed by Director Yanni DiNardo, and I don't think I need to have the explanation today, but in my recollection, this security per lot is something that's interesting to me. I don't know that I've actually seen it worded in exactly that format, but I think that if this tool is something that's available, that it should be explored further. I'd like to get some more information from staff on that one. Look at Mr. Blackwell is going to provide us with an explanation.
Thank you. I would encourage the committee not to rely on this as a tool to use in the future.
Director Yanni DiNardo.
Could you clarify that? Mr. Blackwell? Oh, okay. I have another question on something else. I don't want to put you on the spot. My question is is this not the one that we had seen in the past with the culverts, that they were dropping Ministry of Transportation culverts and the water was going down? I think it was fish-bearing stream and the water was dropping like 8 feet, not sure how fish are going to get one way or the other. Is this the same one?
I don't believe so.
Not the same one. Okay, so your culverts and the road and will be done appropriately for whatever the environment is? Because I'm just checking over the culverts, because I remember seeing a Shawnigan Lake one, and the pictures were up there, that was shocking, which is Ministry of Transportation, but needed to be repaired. Okay, thank you.
Director Nicholson.
I just have a comment on this. I read the minutes from the APC, and there was a recommendation that they recommended moving ahead with this. This is a case where it would have been helpful if there had been a little bit more information in the minutes. Because this is a very complicated application to work through. And I would have appreciated to hear some of our expert advice from the community on something like this, actually articulated in a useful way.
Thank you. Any further questions for staff? You have a further question for staff?
This, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Blackwell, this is just in regards to what's coming up later in the agenda. Would this application avoid the APC and what's proposed later on today?
Do you need an answer to that now, or can you wait? Thank you. Does the committee have any questions for the applicant? Seeing none. Mr. Blackwell, would you read the recommendation, please?
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board, 1, that development permit application number 10-B-17DP at 360 would be approved with the following requirements. 1, compliance with the recommendations contained in report attachments C, D, and F through Q. 2, a restrictive covenant registered on title of the subject property regarding compliance with the development permit conditions prior to issuance of a building permit. 3, a security in the amount of $1,500 per additional lot for construction monitoring for future buildings. 2, that the general manager of land use services be authorized to permit minor revisions to the permit in accordance with the intent of development permit guidelines of OCP bylaw number 2650.
Turn to the director for the area. Moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Nicholson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, the motion carries. R2.
Set. Good afternoon again. This second application is regarding a development variance permit. A slightly unusual situation, development variance permit in a park. Number is DVP 18I01. Arbutus Park in area I. Location of the park is on Cowichan Lake, as you can see there. In detail, an aerial photo shows the park with its popular waterfront beach area and adjacent houses and parklands. The subject property is located in the P1 zone, park zone, and the subject today is discussion of the location of the washroom building, which requires these variances, the new washroom building. And that replaces an old washroom building that was ripped down after years of good use. And there's a few more pictures in your packages regarding that. Again, I'll just go to the variance details. The 6 meter setback is requested to be reduced to 5.2 meters. And the projection of an eave into the setback of 1 meter is requested to be increased from 1 meter to 2.52 meters. You'll note on the survey plan in your package that it shows about 5 centimeters less than those distances, and that's just to give a 2-inch or 5 centimeter leeway for the variance, just to be cautious. The park is about 3,500 square meters and over 0.8 hectares in area. The washroom building proposed is about 57 square meters in area, with that's about over 600 square feet. There was care to site the building. Just go to some photographs here. These were taken the other day. There was care to site the building on the site 30 meters from the lake to avoid environmental impact. And the one curious thing is how did we end up closer than this required setback. Post-site design, there was a decision to angle the building to the west. And unfortunately, there was no resurvey of the new location, which tilted the building. So this ended up where one corner of the building, you can see in the middle slide, the corner closest foreground there, it complies with the variance, 6 meters. So that would be from the corner of the actual concrete wall, the stone wall, to the lot line. And the farther corner in the shade down there, that would be the one that is encroaching into the side yard. Okay, this is the view from adjacent houses where the washroom has been located, and you can see that their view of the lake and so on it's pretty much intact. We can come back there if there's any questions about that. This is a more specific set of photos, just showing exactly where the setback differences are. You can see that close corner meets the setback requirement, and the eave and the other corner do not meet the setback requirement. So we've got 3 options possible here. The first is to relocate the building. That would essentially mean demolishing the building and rebuilding it. The second is to reduce the setback requirements through a variance, the development variance permit, which is the chosen option here. The third was to change the zoning bylaw through an amendment, which is a longer process, and the development variance process was seen as the most appropriate in this case. So, unless there are any questions, we can move to the recommendation.
Any questions for staff? Director Nicholson?
Yeah, I noticed that the mistake was raised by a neighbor, but there is it doesn't appear to be any responses to whether this variance is okay with the neighbors or not.
To date, we haven't received any response. We did move quickly on this application, and the letters were sent out, if I know the date. The letters were mailed out, I didn't know the date there. But I'm not sure if the 10 days are up, but we've been at least a week since the letters were sent. So the 10 days will be up before the board meeting, which is the statutory requirement.
Can I follow up?
If you must.
I must, because it would seem to me that staff must have been talking to the resident at least that raised the issue, and must have some idea of their feelings on this issue.
From what I
And I'd be interested in knowing those.
Mr. Blackwell, please.
So this is a bigger issue potentially than just what is before you, and I cannot respond to that detail with any more specificity.
Okay, well, that makes me kind of uncomfortable to have to make a decision on something when I feel I don't have full information.
Director Kuhn? Is there a seconder? Any further discussion? Mr. Blackwell, would you read the recommendation?
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that application number DVP 18I01 at 10700 Alder Crescent to vary sections 5.36 sub 3 and 3.19 sub 1 sub C sub 2 of bylaw number 2465 to respect 1, reduce the front parcel line setback for the proposed building from 6 meters to 5.2 meters, and 2, increase the exemption for eave and gutter projection into the front parcel line setback from 1.0 meters to 2.52 meters be approved.
Seeing no other hands, call the question. All in favor? Those opposed? Motion carries, and I'd like the committee to take a couple of minute break and we'll return.
We have
I
before
like
you an
these. What's that?
We're ready to roll?
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Floor is yours.
We have before you an application from the Red Arrow Brewing Company located at 5255 Chester Road in Area D with a liquor license application to alter their existing license to include a lounge and special event area. The Liquor Control Licensing Branch requires a input from local government to either opt in or opt out of this process. The RCMP have been communicated with, and they do not appear to be opposed to this application. We have not had any complaints to the best of my knowledge. And the recommendation is that we opt out of this process.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Clement. Mr. Blackwell, would you read the recommendation, please?
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the Cowichan Valley Regional District does not wish to provide comment or recommendations to the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch with regard to the application for a lounge and special event area by the Red Arrow Brewing Company Limited, located at 5255 Chester Road, Cowichan Bay, in Area D, manufacturer license number 306378.
Any discussion? Seeing none. Call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion carries. R4, Mr. Morano.
Mr. Chair, we have another liquor license application before you. This is for Vignetta Zanata Limited Winery located at 5039 Marshall Road with regard to proposed events that they will be having throughout the summer. In this application, we have the local government is requested to either object or not object to these events. We have had no history with regards to complaints on this property with regard to noise in these events. They appear to be effectively controlled in an area where the neighborhood is largely acreage and in the ALR. The ALC, through their gathering for an event in the Agricultural Land Reserve policy, allows for up to 10 events within a calendar year for no more than 150 attendees per event. The recommendation is for no objection.
Turn to the director for the area. Move the recommendation, seconded by Director Kuhn. Would you read the recommendation, please?
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the CVRD has no objection to the events noted on the temporary change to a liquor license 171424 application for Vignetta Zanata Limited located at 5039 Marshall Road in Glenora, Area E, for the following 2018 dates only: June 9, July 1st, 7th, 14th, and 28th, August 4th, 11th, and 18th. And I would ask Mr. Moreno to confirm why there is 2 July 1st on that.
I will get to there right now. It appears that there was a typo.
I think it should be the 21st, 14th, 21st, 28th.
Sorry, what was the date again?
Oh, Ms. Harrison.
Mr. Chair, in the staff report, the recommendation reads as July 21st.
Excellent.
So, Mr. Chair, I would add July 21st to that list of dates as your recommendation.
So it's been moved and seconded. Director Davis?
Thank you. I've been to a number of excellent events there, and I just happened to get in my email like half an hour ago. The second annual Nourish Couch and Gala Dinner is the event on June 9th, hosted by Michaela Pereira with live auction with Norm Jackson. So, sounds like fun.
So the board better authorize this then, eh? Or- Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And the next one, R5, same drill. Go ahead, Mr. Morano.
Mr. Chair, we have another application, liquor license application for a temporary change to a liquor license for the existing license at the Cobblestone Inn located at 3566 Holland Avenue in Cobble Hill. Again, this is local government requested from the Liquor Control Licensing Branch to either opt in or opt out, or sorry, object or not object to this event, which is on June 24th, 2018, for the fundraiser for the Mill Bay Search and Rescue for the hours from 3 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. I did reach out to the RCMP, but it wasn't in time for this report, but I'll read what Constable Chan had to say. Please be advised that I have reviewed the attached temporary liquor license application. We will enforce in accordance to the provincial statute. Approval will need to be granted by the appropriate departments with respect to occupancy both inside and outside the facilities in accordance to regulations and bylaw policies. Please refer to the Liquor Control Licensing Branch to confirm about total allowable occupancy for the event. So it appears they are not necessarily opposed to the event, and they are relying on the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch and the license inspector to oversee this and approve this event, or review this event. And we are recommending to opt out.
Not opposed. Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Clement.
Or sorry, no objection.
Any discussion? Mr. Blackwell?
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the CVRD is not opposed to the temporary change to the existing liquor license 038301 for the Cobblestone Inn located at 3566 Holland Road in Cobble Hill for June 24th, 2018 from 3 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. for a fundraiser for Mill Bay Search and Rescue.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. R7, where's Mr. DeJong? This is a pretty straightforward one. Mr., how about if you just read the resolution for us?
Thank you. The resolution before you for R7 is that it be recommended to the board that the boundary of the Yubo Fire Service Area be extended to cover a section of one property as outlined in the attached map.
Turn to the director for the area. Moved by Director Kuhn, seconded by Director Yanni Donardo. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Allison, thank you for coming in on your day off.
Thank you. So this report recommends changes to the development application procedures and fees bylaw, specifically with respect to applications. There we go. Great. So just to give a little bit of background on development permits. The development permits originate from the official community plan. So development permit areas are identified in official community plans when there are areas within a plan area that requires particular attention, such as floodplains, farming areas, slopes, any places that require special environmental protection, such as riparian areas or marine waterfront areas. And development permit areas can also establish form and character guidelines for areas along a Trans-Canada Highway, for example, or village core areas. The second point on the slide is that an owner is obligated to get a development permit before developing their property if in a development permit area. And the third point is quite important. If it is demonstrated that an applicant addresses the development permit guidelines, the board is legally obligated to approve a development permit. So this slide demonstrates two different avenues that our approval process can follow. So on the left is the sort of the conventional process, and we actually already within our procedures bylaw have both types of development permit processes. So what we're proposing here is not something new, it's just increasing the amount of development permits that would be following the process outlined on the right. So to start, it all starts with the planning analysis. So once we receive an application, we coordinate a site visit, we review the application, we review the OCP and zoning bylaws, we meet with the applicant. We then either prepare an application to be referred to the Advisory Planning Commission for that community. After the APC sets their meeting, the meeting is held, the information comes back to the planning staff, we then prepare a report to present to this committee, and then the final approval for that development permit is at the CVRD board. The streamlined recommended process that we increase is a planning staff report to the general manager of the Land Use Services Department with final approval with the general manager. And you can see the time difference of these two processes, 4 to 6 months, very approximate and very much depends on the complexity of the application versus 1 to 2 months. So as I said, we already have many development permit areas that are delegated to the general manager for approval, and this table lists those. So the electoral areas is listed there on the left, and all the different development permit areas and our guidelines that if someone is in this type of development permit area, it doesn't come to this committee, it goes straight to our general manager for approval. And these are the proposed development permit guidelines to be added to that list with the recommended, the bylaw before you. So these are all development permit areas that are completely based on technical guidelines. So we're looking at protection of nests and habitat protection guidelines, wildfire interface guidelines, agricultural community guidelines, that's for a specific area in Area E, couch and river, wetland protection. So again, mostly development permit areas where the applicant must generally provide a professional report. And in that case, if they've done that, and then we are sort of legally bound to issue the permit. So we feel we are able to do that efficiently and appropriately at a staff level. I should note as well that all development permits for subdivision in the South Cowichan would continue to come to this, to be referred to the Advisory Planning Commission if they were for subdivisions over a certain number of lots, just as set out in the current procedures bylaw, and be presented to this committee. And all development permits that are based on, or that are for commercial, industrial, multifamily, where there's more subjective analysis of the guidelines, those would still be going to the Advisory Planning Commission and this committee as well. So the rationale is to reduce staff time, which would allow us to focus more on departmental priorities, reduce the direct cost of processing the applications, reduce the processing time for landowners significantly, reduce the number of applications on this agenda, increase consistency across the electoral areas, and improve procedural fairness, and also improve engagement with the APCs. And that last point may be controversial, but in my experience here at the CVRD, it is somewhat frustrating for the Advisory Planning Commissions to be referred an application that is entirely based on technical guidelines when there's really no input or no opportunity for input. It's not that there's not an incredible amount of capacity at the Advisory Planning Commissions, but when we have a professional report, there is just little room for an Advisory Planning Commission to provide comment on that. And it's somewhat misleading to refer applications with that expectation. So that's why point 6 is improving engagement with APCs. They would still see applications when there is room for their valuable input. So the summary is to add to the existing list of development permit types, which are delegated to the General Manager of Land Use Services. We'd be adding a fee for applications to appeal to the CVRD board. In the existing procedures bylaw, there's already an appeal process, but we would be adding about a $200 fee. And the final point is just to repeal and replace the current development application procedures and fees bylaw. Thank you.
And thank you. Questions for staff? Director Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So looking at this with all of the different reasons, send it to an APC or to have a development permit that would come to this committee and the board, would all applications in Area D continue to come to the board or not? Because right now, Area D is an entirely a development permit area. Would there be some that would be approved by the general manager?
You just turned it off.
Thank you.
There you go.
I'll just go back to the slide. So this is the slide shows the existing procedures bylaw. So as you can see under the Area D, there are already many development permits that are delegated to the general manager. Because I think that OCP is so new, the procedures bylaw accurately reflects which development permits are delegated and which ones go through the committee and APC. So there's no changes to it because it is accurately done currently in the bylaw.
So the reason why there were far more development permits that came through this table for Area D last year was because they just had a lot of applications for them, not because the number of options to send it?
I think a significant change in the Area D official community plan was requiring development permits for single-family construction. All development permits for single-family construction are delegated currently to the general manager. So there would have been no change to sort of the experience at the community level. Perhaps it was just a reflection of the number of, or the extent of development in that community.
Thank you.
Got Director Dory, Nicholson, and Kuhn. Anyone else? Director Dory.
Yes, through you to to Allison. Will there be any difference in cost, streamlining the 1-2 months versus the 3-4 months? Are they the same, relative to the same cost?
There is no change to the fee structure. The only change would be if an appeal of a decision. If the general manager denied an application and the applicant appealed it, then we would be charging for that because we'd be taking them through the full process. But otherwise, no change.
Yeah. Thank you.
Director Nicholson.
Can you clarify, when do development permit applications go to the APC?
Yes, I can. The procedures bylaw sets it all out. So any development permit for commercial, industrial development, I mean, it depends a lot on which electoral area we're talking about and which official community plans development permit guidelines we're looking at. In South Cowichan and Area D, all subdivision requires a development permit. So that's why we see a lot of development permits for subdivision coming through to this committee. The subdivision is a unique situation because the APC is not referred subdivision application development permits if only, I think, 3 is the threshold. If fewer than 3 lots are being created, the application just comes to the Electoral Services Committee. It bypasses the Advisory Planning Commission. But applications where there's more than 3 new lots being created, then it goes to the APC before coming to the Electoral Services Committee. But in all other development permits that are not delegated to the general manager, they would be going to the APC.
It would go to the APC.
Yeah, but that's different than like other applications such as variance permits. They do not go to the APC at all. They just come here. Board of Variance does not go to the APC either.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. Just to add on to that, should the CVRD assume the approving officer function, none of the subdivision applications would come to the committee or board. By statute, that would be the case.
So then we can go home.
Follow up.
Well, it just seems to me that there should, I would be looking for some consistency moving forward on this harmonization project, because it seems like it's all over the map. But I have some comments about this general idea. And I really appreciate the advice of our APC, my community APC. They've got a lot of technical expertise as well as good connection with the community. What I don't, so from my perspective, I use them as much as a sort of a check and balance on applications, as I do for, you know, basic community advice on what's appropriate for the community. I know that on this technical stuff, we rely to a large extent on the QUEEPs and professional reliance model, and I haven't been very satisfied that that does us full justice on a lot of these technical issues. So we've caught a few things at the APC, and I think that that's really important. We do not have staff that are trained in the environmental area that are reviewing these applications, and I remain really concerned about this because most of the stuff they're talking about here are about environmental issues. So, you know, I'm about continuous improvement. We do not have a monitoring program so that we understand what's going on in our areas. We don't sort of monitor how land use is changing and whether our policies and our bylaws are having the effect that we want. So I don't feel comfortable taking away the one thing that I use as a checks and balance at this point in time. And maybe if in the future we had some monitoring system and we had maybe more environmental training on staff, I could maybe think about it. But right now, I really would feel concerned about taking anything away from my APC. I rely on them heavily. And the other issue that I think has been really important is as we've developed this OCP review, there's been a lot of stuff that's come up through these applications that you kind of go, whoa, why is it this way? And it's because it doesn't make any sense. We'd lose that possibility. We'd remain in status quo if we just accepted it all. So I cannot support this. But I understand why it would be nice to make this a much more efficient system. So to that end, my other question is about that little diagram of the two streams. If we can delegate this to the general manager, why can it not be delegated to the EASC? Why does it have to go to the board? Why do we have to take that extra 2-week step? Maybe we could eliminate that, and that would help a little bit.
Mr. Blackwell.
Well, I would defer to our legislative services expert. However, as it currently stands now, this is just a committee of the board, so you give recommendations for the board. That would...
Yeah, maybe it's Ms. Harrison. Any comment? Okay. Okay, Director Kuhn?
I move the recommendation.
It's moved and seconded, but I've got Director Acton and Yanni Donardo to speak, so we'll put it on the floor. Director Acton.
We're missing prime suntanning time. I guess my question is, I would like to see, or please clarify where it says that the director could refer to the APC, and if that is the case, I would like to have that option without it causing a flag, a harmful flag, or whatever the terminology is used here, that you're intentionally trying to cause the applicant problems, I've heard before. So, and maybe we could have, maybe you could answer that question.
Well, I'm just going to guess on what you're seeing in the bylaw is that when a director of an area specifically requests that it be sent to the APC. So as it stands, that's just for development variance permits and agricultural land reserve applications. And my experience of that is that it would be presented to this committee first, because those applications don't, as a first step, go to the advisory planning commissions. It comes here, then this committee could send it to the advisory planning commission, which I believe is at your discretion anyways. But I hope that answers your question.
Well, wouldn't we have the discretion to refer the application to the APC? Like, we can do that now. It doesn't have to be certain types.
If I may, so with as it stands now, if we get an application for agricultural protection, most of the communities have protection of farming development permit areas. So if someone's coming in and wants to build a house on or adjacent to the agricultural land reserve or an agriculturally designated land, then we process that at a staff level, and it doesn't come to this committee at all. And we don't, at this point, notify the directors when an application is received. It would be just presented directly to the general manager. And if it meets the development permit guidelines as set out in the community's official community plan, then it's recommended for approval. Normally, the directors are copied on the notices that go to the applicants to say the development permit has been approved. Or, if there was alternative to those scenarios, then you'd be CC'd on that correspondence as well.
So essentially, it would be too late. It would already have gone through the process, and so I guess I'm still confused about why the director, it's only under those two circumstances that the director would have the ability to refer to the APC.
Mr. Blackwell?
So I'll reiterate, as it stands now, those applications that appear before this committee have the opportunity to be referred to the APC if those applications are not the ones that would normally be referred to the APC. Those applications that don't come to the EASC, that are processed at a staff level, circumvent the whole process. They shortcut the process with regard to not coming to the EASC. So there's no opportunity for the elected official to refer it to the APC because they won't see it.
So second question then, was it considered that possibly applications could, all the ones that you're suggesting go to the general manager in order to, what Director Nicholson referred to, in order to kind of look at it from that lens too? Was it considered that if they come to the electoral area services first to the committee, and it would be up to the director of the area to refer or not? Because then that way you have at least that glance from the public before going.
It's true, and that was definitely considered. I think that presents its own set of challenges because you cannot give applicants, property owners, community members a reasonable timeline. Right? So you can't, it's easier to tell someone that this is the process that it will follow. I think there's a lot of a frustration experienced by property owners when there's no set process. So it's not been recommended here.
Sure, but if that was the process, with my own guesstimate, it would save 6 weeks if it doesn't get referred to APC. So at least they would have that opportunity. Maybe it's not a guarantee, but could shorten the lifespan of their application.
Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you. So one of the things I would suggest for consideration is procedural fairness. So what you would not want to set yourselves up for is random referrals to APCs. In other words, you should set some criteria with respect to which applications, under what circumstances would be eligible to be referred and which ones would not. To create the perception that it's on a whim is, I would suggest, problematic. In some cases, depending on the nature of the application, there's a lot of money at stake. If somebody's building a house, they have to line up their trades and so forth. And a 2-month swing with regard to when an application might be completed is very problematic for homeowners that want to undertake major investments like that.
Director, did I get Director Kuhn move the resolution? Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Area D, I really value my Area D APC, but they don't want to deal with the technical. They actually get really nervous when and we have professional staff here. I'm hoping that we all feel comfortable with the professional staff that is hired to be able to do this. And do we need to double our staff if we're having, we're there, everyone is full out. So I'm seeing this as an advantage, and I think this is something that we need to change and not lead that long time lag. And my APC, they're valuable when they're needed, but they are actually There's nobody that's a hydrologist. When they get into all of that and all the technical stuff, they feel really quite nervous. So I'm not sure about other APCs, but mine do. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Blackwell, would you please read the recommended resolution for us on R8?
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that Development Application Procedures and Fees Bylaw number 4204, 2018 be forwarded to the board for considerations of 3 readings and adoption.
Are you wanting questions? I haven't called the vote yet. Director Nicholson.
I would like to amend the motion to take Area E development permit areas out of there.
Is there a seconder? Seeing none. Discussion on the amendment.
I think it's appropriate to take the Couch and Coxisla development permit areas out because they're under review right now, and I think that this should be taken into account and not included at this time.
Thank you. Seeing no other. Director Acton on the amendment.
Oh, well, I would just like to say that I'd like to hear from everyone, because I'm finding this is a complicated issue, or it feels like a hard decision. And so I look to my colleagues.
Director Clement on the amendment.
Yeah, I think that I had an application, I think it was a variance actually, when I called Mr. Blackwell and he explained to me the difference between simple subdivision, variance, and rezoning, and what you can ask for in those processes and what the APC could ask for in those processes. And as I look at this list, and I think Allison put it really well, is that if they meet the requirements, we are legally obligated to give them the permit. And so there's really not a whole lot of leeway in terms of what an APC can offer. And I think if we start plucking out areas, it doesn't make sense because the requirements are there. And so as we've seen them go through, and I've never had a problem in my area, let them continue doing their job, and let's try and expedite any kind of applications that are coming through. I think this is a great thing, and I don't think we should be pulling individual areas out.
Thank you, Director Kuhn. On the amendment.
Yeah, I don't think this is such a complicated issue as it's made out to be. It's very straightforward. Either they're in the area or they're not, and I don't think we need an APC for that.
Director Marcotte.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do, I'm very pleased with my APC for the most parts. They do give a snapshot of what the public may be feeling. On the other hand, I think it's very important that we get it right, and that we are able to have it come from our staff member who is a professional and gives us good advice as well. So it's just a little bit of a tricky situation. Thank you.
So I'm going to call the question on Director Nicholson on the amendment.
Yeah, I don't want people to be left with the impression that I don't think staff do a good job. They do, but they are not biologists or ecologists. And a lot of the development permit areas are about protecting the environment. And what happens is the applicant hires a QEEP, and they provide a report, and it's often, these are biologists, professional, qualified environmental, whatever they're called, professionals, and they're from Victoria or somewhere else, and they don't have the context of the area that they're working in. And so they deal with their little plot of land, but environmental stuff is about the landscape and outside of a little application area. And so if often the APC can provide that perspective and can question some of the QEEP's assertions. And I think everyone makes mistakes, and I think checks and balances are really important because our staff do not have that kind of training, period. They don't. So, you know, I think it's important, for my area, I think to make a good decision, it's important that there's been some extra checking about it. So that's where I'm at with this.
Thank you. Director Kuhn, it's on the amendment only. I gave Director Nicholson some leeway on that.
Yes,
Just to the amendment of
I do get the message, but
excluding
my suspicion is you would get more emotions involved than anything else. I would suggest then to Director Nicholson, well, how much evidence do you have that your APC staff have a greater understanding than staff here? You don't have that evidence. So it's all an emotional stuff. So I like to leave emotions out of decisions that have to do with land use.
I'm going to call a question on the amendment, and the amendment is to remove Area E from this resolution. All those in favor? And those opposed? The motion is defeated. Back to the main motion. We've had it read, moved and seconded. Do you have anything new?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to say thank you to everyone who gave their input, and I too value the APC, and I also do understand that it is frustrating on the other end, that we do need to streamline things, and so I will be voting to approve this. And I do appreciate what staff does and their knowledge, so thanks.
Thank you. Any further comment, discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? The motion carries. That will be going to the board on May the 9th. Next item, R9, Mr. Conway.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee. So this next report that's before you is primarily intended to outline a strategy for implementing Bylaw 4147, which is the CVRD soil deposit bylaw. This bylaw received first and second reading by the board in November, and it's been referred to the Ministry of Energy, Mines and Petroleum Resources and to the Ministry of Environment, as approval from those ministries is required before the bylaw can be adopted and be considered valid. To date, we've received a response from Energy and Mines that has advised that their approval is not required because the bylaw does not deal with soil removal, and we're still awaiting a formal response from the Ministry of Environment. The CVRD has not been in the business of regulating soil movements in the past, and it's expected that a substantial investment in resources will be necessary to successfully implement the bylaw in the associated permitting process, particularly if the outcomes intended by the bylaw are to be realized. This report before you outlines a strategy for implementing the bylaw and also identifies the resources and the timeframes that staff consider necessary to accomplish the implementation. The strategy is quite a bit more intensive than other CVRD regulatory bylaws. I think, as everybody knows, most bylaws are enforced on a complaint basis, where the public is expected to understand and know the bylaw, and we essentially just get involved when we receive complaints. And this is a screening process that really helps to allocate resources to deal with issues that are affecting individuals and neighborhoods, so that we can focus resources where the problems are. This soil deposit bylaw is a little bit different, though. It's going to be a bigger undertaking because we haven't been in this business in the past. There's an educational component to this, where we have to get the public up to speed with what this new bylaw is about, and get compliance through education as well as enforcement. And so there's a bit of a different tact being proposed here, where it's going to involve more intensive resources applied to the implementation than would be typical. couple of other considerations. The issue of soil deposit is very high profile, particularly in the south end. The public is very concerned about this issue, and we're expecting that once this bylaw is adopted, that there'll be quite a bit of attention on soil deposit movements, and we'll be dealing with a lot of inquiries and complaints and issues about this. So we want to be as best prepared as we can be for this, so that we're in a position where we can actually deal with matters. Adopting a bylaw is one thing, but actually having the system in place to deal with it is another, and that's what this report and the recommendation is trying to get to. So there's 4 main components to the strategy. These are communication, administration, enforcement, and bylaw amendments and maintenance. And I'll just briefly touch on these different components of the strategy. So to begin with communications, there's a number of specific actions that are proposed here. There would have to be an upgrade to the CVRD website so that all relevant information would be posted on the website, and any other information such as application forms and the process for applying and just to give all this general information that the public and landowners can access in order to comply with the permitting process. We're proposing to issue notifications to owners of fill sites. We're aware of a number of commercial fill sites, and we're proposing that we contact each of those owners individually, let them know of the requirements and of the permitting process, and work with them to get them up to speed as to what they need to do in order to comply. We're also proposing a number of other ways of notifying, things such as press releases, newspaper ads, publishing on social media, as well as on the CVRD website. There's going to be work needed to have staff at the regional district trained and up to speed on that bylaw so that they can deal with the inquiries as they come in. I think as we get into implementing the bylaw, there's going to be a raft of inquiries and interactions with the public on this matter. And then lastly, we're proposing that there be some information meetings that be conducted. We have had contact with some of the industry associations, trucking associations, that sort of thing, and there's been expressions of interest to have the CVRD meet and explain the bylaw, and this strategy proposes to have capacity so that we can do that, to organize meetings and to have communications that can happen out in the field, both with industry and the public. The second main component of the strategy deals with administration. So there's a whole new permitting process with this bylaw that has to be implemented, and that process has to be built from the ground up, really. There isn't any process in place right now, so there's a bunch of actions needed. We need to create application materials, forms, guides, fee schedules, templates for things such as signage. We also need to develop the process for receiving and processing permits and issuing those permits. We're proposing to prepare a procedures manual that would help staff understand in a step-by-step way how these permits will be processed. Coordinating the fee component of this with our finance department, establishing a tracking and monitoring program for the permits. There's some staffing implications for this, and we're proposing to be hiring staff, and then lastly, amending the budget so that there can be some resourcing applied to it. With respect to enforcement, there are specific actions needed on enforcement. There's going to have to be phasing in of this strategy, we expect. So we'll be having some further discussions with this committee and the board about the proposed strategy for phasing in the bylaw, but it's expected that our approach will be to focus on the large commercial fill sites where the main problems have been experienced, and then work on the smaller fill sites as once the program is up and running. In addition, we're proposing to prepare a specific enforcement policy for this particular bylaw. And then there's quite a bit of implementation needed in terms of actual on-the-ground enforcement and creating a monitoring program for tracking the permitting, the permits that were issued and making sure that there's compliance with those permits. And the last point here, or the last component of the strategy, deals with the bylaw itself. We're anticipating that there is going to have to be some adjustment to the bylaw, partly because we're anticipating that the Ministry of Environment is going to have some input into this bylaw, and there's going to have to be some adjustments made there. And then there's also some aspects of the bylaw that I think we might want to just tune up before it gets implemented. In the longer run, after the bylaw is up and running, we're also expecting that there's going to be issues with, just encountered with the bylaw, and there likely will be improvements needed to it as time goes on. We're going to discover things in the bylaw, and we're proposing that there be monitoring, that we monitor the input that we receive on that bylaw from industry and the public, and that approximately 1 year after the bylaw has been adopted, that we come back to the board and this committee and propose some fine-tuning of it so that we can get it in the best shape possible based on what we've learned after that initial implementation. So that's the broad strategy. There's probably going to be an evolving thing. It's going to get adjusted as we move forward. But the main point I want to make here is that there's, this is going to be an intensive effort. To get this thing off the ground and get it running well, it's going to require a focused effort. In the staff report, there is some budget numbers outlined. Sorry, I don't have a slide showing them, but we're anticipating that there will be a full-time bylaw enforcement position needed for this program and a half-time position needed to help administer it. The half-time position would likely be a contract position to begin with, where we'd be getting somebody with some expertise in public relations and graphic designs to help us get the program up and running. And then in the longer term, that would likely just be a more of a clerical position, a half-time clerical position that would administer the program, and then a bylaw officer position, which would largely be out in the field dealing with the enforcement and the follow-through with the permitting process. The schedule that I've got on this slide shows the estimated time frame. It's an estimate at this point because it depends on a few different factors, one of the big ones being the Ministry of Environment approval of the bylaw. So we have had some discussions with ministry staff, but and we're expecting there's likely going to have to be some adjustments made to the bylaw, but it's not entirely clear when the approval will be forthcoming. So the strategy here shows the implementation time frame, and we're expecting that this is going to run out close towards the end of this year before the full implementation will be achievable. So the recommendation that we've got, sorry, I don't see the recommendation slide. It's in the report. There are 3 components to it. It's
1, 2, 3.
essentially that the implementation strategy that I've outlined be endorsed. That's the first part of the recommended resolution. Secondly, that the soil deposit bylaw be brought back to this committee with proposed amendments at the earliest opportunity. And then thirdly, that the budget for function 320, the 2018 budget, be amended. And I won't read through the resolutions, recommended resolutions before
We'll make Mr. Blackwell read through those.
Yes, he'll read it when the time comes, yes.
Excellent. Questions for Rob? Director Kuhn.
The changes that I'm proposing for lowering the threshold, would that be dealt with now, or
Mr. Conway?
Yeah, so staff will be coming back with a number of recommended adjustments, and they will
Okay.
include things such as reconsidering the threshold, yes.
Your second question?
Okay, the second is with regard to the budget. Now, in your report here, you're quoting that you expect expenses of 126.5, and they should be offset by fees and permits revenues. But I'm quite sure that's not going to take place in this year. So in other words, you need a budget amendment to increase costs.
Yes, I understand. So budget 320, it includes fees and permit fees from a number of sources, primarily from building permit application fees.
And do you think they will be offsetting the additional costs that we have here?
Well, to date, the fee revenue has been up, and it's over the budgeted amount. And we don't know for sure, because we don't know what the rest of the year is going to entail. But indications up to this point are that fees in 320 are higher than what was included in the 2018 budget. So if that pattern continues, then there should be a surplus, and then that's what's proposed to cover this work or this expenditure.
Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you. Just to add on a little bit to that, it's hard to predict exactly what the revenues will be. It's somewhat difficult to predict precisely what the expenditures are going to be. So this is kind of a best guess scenario of capturing that. As Mr. Conway indicated, if we find at the CVRD that revenues are such that these numbers are covered off, that's fine. However, if in the alternative we determine that there's a deficit, that deficit will have to come by increase in requisition for the 2019 budget year.
Follow-up, Director Kuhn?
Yeah, I guess there's a little bit of bother to me on this whole thing, and that is it's again happening quarter way through the year that we're faced with additional staff, and the budget is set. As from my thinking, if the fees don't come in as expected, we'll have a shortfall. And if I had foreseen that at the beginning of the year, I would have never gone for the grants and aid. I would have cut those back. And that's something that really bugs me of what's going on here, because we keep increasing the costs and we don't decrease on any other side. And yet we have options, but we just don't use them. And then, so ever so slightly, the fees and the tax requisitions keep creeping up. And it bothers me immensely. I'm a numbers guy, and I guess that really chokes me. We should have, at the beginning of the year, we should have a clear view as to how much staff do we need and how much are we going to hire. And we should have a clear window as to say, okay, that's what we're going to face. And if we have an option like granting aids, where we allocated 150,000, if I had seen, let's say, that we might have a potential shortfall of 20 or 40,000, I would have cut back the grants in aid. And we have that option, and we don't use it. And then we wonder, every year we wonder afterwards, well, how did we get there? Well, it's no, I'm not surprised. We're getting there because we're too uncritical. We look at things and say, oh yeah, okay, we need that. Oh, we need that too. So anyway, I just want to make this point because it dissatisfies me. That should have come up at the beginning of the year. We should have known there's a possibility, or failing that, then we should leave enough leeway for the upcoming year that we could cover that, and that we don't have to make budget adjustments afterwards and increase taxes. I just don't like that way of moving anyway.
Thank you. Are you wanting to jump in? Mr. Carruthers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In all fairness, and I respect Director Kuhn's comments, we made this committee and the board well aware of the need for staffing. This bylaw has been in the development stage for probably well over a year, and at every critical step of the way, we have been very clear that the implementation of this bylaw was going to require increased staffing. We have been abundantly clear about that. The challenge is that we were developing the intricacies and the details of this budget, and we were recognizing that there was going to need to be work done. We were, short-resourced with staff leaving us, and Mr. Conway was assigned the responsibility for developing the implementation strategy for this bylaw. We didn't have the fine details to be able to put into the budget, but we were aware that we would be coming back to this committee with some amendments to the budget to be able to staff this appropriately once we had those details. So I have to say that at no time did we not advise this committee that staffing would be required. It's unfortunate that timing didn't allow us to have those details when the budget was done, and I appreciate that. Your alternative is to not implement this and to wait until the 2019 budget when we can put together solid staffing numbers. That's the alternative to this dilemma.
I'm going to ask Mr. Blackwell to read the recommendation in a moment, but just want to remind everyone that we are anticipating likely changes to this bylaw from the Ministry of Environment. It's out for referral right now. And while we might like to be in the field and working with this document and doing the enforcement, the likelihood is it won't be until later in the year or perhaps in the new year. But I'm going to refer back to what our friend and ever watchful Mr. Evans said at the beginning of the meeting. Let's give Mr. Conway the tools to begin the conversations with industry and to begin to lay the groundwork for this to be a successful bylaw. So I think we had a mover and a seconder on this, did we not? Director Acton, do you have something further to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Conway. I agree, we have to give him the tools for sure. And I think to Director Kuhn's comment, I don't see why we couldn't have planned a little bit for the funding, because we knew this was coming. This is no news for us, so we could have guessed somewhere. But it is something that for sure I would hope all the communities support, and it's definitely something that needs to be done. There's lots of anxiety with all the truckloads and everything that's happening, and I want to give Mr. Conway the tools to go after those big offenders, because if you want to talk about money, the damage that is being done is millions and millions of dollars, and we continuously get the province and the federal government continuously put the onus on us. So we're saving ourselves money. So I will be voting yes for this. Thank you.
Not sure that we had the moved and seconded. Mr. Blackwell's going to read out the recommendation anyways, and then I'll ask for it.
So the recommendation before you is 3 parts. That it be recommended to the board, 1, that soil deposit bylaw implementation strategy outlined in the May 2nd, 2018 Electoral Area Services Committee meeting report from the manager of inspections and enforcement be endorsed. 2, that changes to the CVRD bylaw number 4147, soil deposit bylaw 2017, be brought to the EASC for consideration with proposed amendments at the earliest opportunity. And 3, that the 2018 budget for Function 320, Inspections and Enforcement, be amended to A, increase salaries expenditures by $35,000, B, increase benefits expenditures by $8,000, C, increase contract for services by $50,000, D, increase advertising expenditures by $9,000, E, increase computer software upgrade expenditures by $2,500. F, increase office supplies expenditures by $2,000. G, increase miscellaneous equipment expenditures by $5,000. H, increase legal service expenditures by $15,000. And I, increase fees and permit revenues by $126,500.
That's been moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, the motion carries. R10. So I put this on the agenda because a number of directors had approached me and asked when we might have an opportunity to look at key priorities and work plan items that are in the pipeline, could be wrapped up and buttoned up in the next number of months. And I think that there's been different projects that people have been sort of following and shepherding along, and staff have been working on a number, and I just wanted to give the committee an opportunity to speak to what they see as being key priorities in the next few months, and what they'd like to see staff pay specific attention to if there's an ability to wrap things up sooner than later. So because you came and asked for the opportunity, here it is, and open the floor. Director Clement.
I've said in another meeting before, and that's around our developer's handbook. It's great that we're working on these harmonization components, as well as a Caution 2050. Those are great high-level platforms to be looking at, and I understand that. But again, I am looking at ways that we can be more effective with the community. A lot of these mom and pop subdividers who are doing these small applications, who are ever only going to do it once, need a little more handholding. As we've heard, that is actually a substantial amount of the traffic that comes through. And I just don't see it being an onerous exercise if we put a pause on these larger items that are going to take a while anyway. It just would be really nice to wrap that up by the end of the term, to see someone come in who's never done an application to be able to be hopefully as equipped as possible, even if it means it's kind of a draft version that gets revised in next year. So that's something that I'd really like to see. There's been hiccups with a couple of applications in my area, that this clarity of what the expectation was on either side, whether it be staff or the applicant side, would have possibly made these amenities come true. So that's what I'd really like to see, is just a really simple manual, whether it be digital or a hard copy, just laying through, okay, are you doing a variance? Are you going to apply for more than one variance at one time? That happened with someone in my area, that they could have put both in at the same time, or here are the fees that are expected, and just really walk people through. And I'm hoping, if it's written up well enough, that it'll save staff time, the back and forth, and just, oh, I'm waiting on this because I need to get this from them that they should have known right away. So I see it as a big opportunity to save staff time, and also a high value to our constituents.
Thank you. I've got Director Yanni DiNardo, Davis, Marcotte, and myself, and Acton. So Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just hope that we didn't add and keep adding more on to the staff, because in this way we're not going to really complete much of anything, because we keep adding on. The harmonization of the OCPs really needs to happen. I would like to see that as a priority. But higher than that, the subdivision approving officer that we're working on, I don't know, it might take a lot longer. We're being the only ones in BC doing this, but that is, for me, that is, would have made the world of difference as a director. And at the OCP, there's some lingering issues with the Area D OCP that I would like to see if we could move ahead with that. But other than that, I'd just like to see that we could start focusing on departmental priorities like we had heard in the past. And I think the handbook, the communication in the handbook was one from quite a while ago. And hoping that Ministry of Transportation and continue with our discussion with the off-road multi-use trails as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo, Director Davis, Marcotte, Acton, and myself. Director Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I go into my list, I was just wondering what kind of timelines there are on what the existing priorities are, like the soil bylaw. Mr. Conway's working on that, and I was wondering what kind of timelines. And then there's the dog bylaw as it sits. I don't know if hopefully getting that going without the other things proposed for it.
So I'll turn to Mr. Blackwell in a minute, but I'm suggesting, and Director Yanni DiNardo's already hit on this, that like this can't be new. This is, we might have to hold something in abeyance to make sure something that we all agree on is a priority is, and I'm thinking the next 3 months basically, but what I'm hoping is we put forward what we believe are key priorities, and that we might hear back from staff perhaps at our next meeting saying, okay, here's the work plan, here's your priorities, this is how we might make this work if there's going to be any changes in what we've already currently got in the pipe. So does that help? And Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. So through you, with regard to capacity, staff and some staff are exceeding this, but several staff are over 100% utilized. In fact, there are some staff that are at 120% utilization. So certainly option one could be add more to the list, and we just put it at the bottom of the list and it gets done when it gets done. Option two, we act on it straight away, but I would suggest, in all honesty, that's very much like spreading too much bread, or too little butter on too much bread. It will slow everything down to almost an imperceptible crawl as we move everything forward, spreading ourselves so very thin that the change is almost imperceptible. So it's about making sure, I would suggest, that we have a viable span of control with regard to the project so that we can complete them within a reasonable period of time. So the ones that you have identified on this list so far, so harmonization, Couch in 2050, the soil bylaws and other bylaws that enforcement have, take us to beyond 100% capacity. We are exceeding our capacity, which slows things down. That said, I hope that we can get a lot of these big ticket items completed in some form or other prior to the end of this election cycle. So ideally before the summer break. That's the target. Anything again that's added to that list will slow us down and push us into the fall and maybe beyond.
I was just wondering how much room there was on the side of Mr. Blackwell's desk to advance the Mill Bay design charrette that we'd budgeted sometime last year with Community Works funds.
Thank you. So you're fortunate insofar as coming from the private sector, I have no life. And very much like a vampire, I tend not to sleep at night. So that said, that's perhaps a discussion that we need to have, because there are some other ideas that folks have for Ross Blackwell's corner of his desk. So I only have 4 corners, so I got to make sure I get the right things on each corner.
We got to get you a round desk.
It's a good thing this one requires a consultant and not much staff time.
Does that conclude your comments, Director Davis?
Sure.
Director Marcotte.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My priority would be what it has been for quite some time. We need to press the provincial government to give us a community charter for the electoral area directors. That would solve so many problems for us. It was promised way back when Premier Campbell was the leader of the parade there, and he promised that he would give us that, and it has not happened, and I think we should utilize our contacts in UBCM and AVICC and any other group that we could get to put maybe some papers together and press hard for a community charter for electoral area directors. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Director Clement. The handbook sounds like a good idea. It's been talked about for a while, and I would hope that it would save people time and some of the developers who have been frustrated with some of the process too, by not knowing or not being told certain, like they just didn't know to ask a certain question, so you don't know what you don't know. So that would be, and the money is there to do that. So obviously the affordable housing is a priority, and the watershed, those are two top priorities to happen before the election. I'd like to see riparian signage, and there is a function there for that. I know that I was a part of some meetings as an alternate, and that kind of fell to the wayside. And the approving officer obviously is important, but I don't know how much time, if that's actually gonna take up any staff time, but we're just waiting for the province, is my understanding. And I would be happy to see the dog bylaw kind of be on the shelf for a little bit until the new board, and also the regional recreation, the proposal of the sub-regional committees. I think that is something that could also wait with the new board to build up for building those relationships instead of introducing that right now as a focus, or could go at the bottom of the list so that it, and I would also say, if anybody else agrees, because I'm not actually well versed on the Cowichan 2050, but if that was to go near the bottom of the list for the next board, that to me is something that would be fine as well.
Thank you. Ross wants to give us a little update on the approving officer, and I was hoping we would just sort of create the list and then go back, so you can hold off on that. Okay, I've got myself next on the list. I think a key is the work on the roadside and rural pathways. I think that's a really important thing, and that could be a major legacy that this committee and this board could do for our communities. The riparian signage, it's almost too late for this year. So, I think there's those couple of items. We've made the list. I look at those things, and I've got a couple of things that I'm trying to push in my community. I'm trying to de-stratify a strata, which requires sewer and highways, but that's just going to have to fall by the wayside. So looking at the things that we've put forward to this point, I think we're going to have to look at what may need to be held in abeyance for a bit, and what would rise to the top. I think Director Clement's recommendation around the developer handbook is key, and I hope we could allocate some resources to do that. And I think both Mr. Blackwell and Mr. Carruthers will have some thoughts as to, I hope they'll have some thoughts as to what they're hearing from us today. I will also note that we haven't heard from Director Kuhn, Dory, or Nicholson, and would either of you, any of you, like to jump in and provide any thoughts, or shall we move on? You're good? Director Nicholson?
Yeah, I have to look at this thing that's in front of us all the time.
Yep.
And I actually think that before we move into this next budget cycle, we ought to sit down and have a serious workshop about where we're going with things, because I think that we're struggling to do our regular work, the regular operating work in electoral area services, and we have all these ideas on how to make things work a lot better, or new initiatives like the trails, and those aren't really going anywhere. I think it's a real problem. In 4 years, I don't think we're going to see. We shifted a bit, but I don't think we're going to have any major accomplishments, and I think it's because there's a lack of capacity And so I think we need to have serious conversation about, you know, what we actually need to get things done. If we actually want to move things and do things better, which I do. I know the harmonization project, it's going to barely get off the ground before the fall, so I don't think we'll see any major improvements coming out of that anytime soon, but it's an important thing that we can't let go, so I think for improving efficiency around here. But yeah, I'm really concerned. I'm, you know, I've got my OCP, it's not going to be, as far as I can tell, I don't think it's going to get done. And that's just straight being a capacity issue. Some unfortunate setbacks along the way, but, you know, I don't know what to say anymore. Nothing that I thought I was going to set out to get done is going to get done in this term. And a lot of other things that I see the organization needs to do aren't getting done either. So I'm really worried. So I would like to have a workshop, and so we're prepared going into the budgeting things to make some difficult decisions about how to deal with the capacity.
Thank you. I've just been given a hand signal that we've got a director will have to depart shortly, but is there any other additions, comment? Director Davis to close, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quick acknowledgement of a couple of emails that we got last night and this morning from a neighborhood in Mill Bay that's had it's been under, well, bylaw enforcement and have had to kick out all their tenants. And from talking with Mr. Conway, I know Area D does not have a minimum parcel size to have secondary suites, and Mr. Dennison tells me that there would be enough water, so I don't know that there is enough water for that neighborhood should they want to do that, and what would be the best process for this. Should all of the people in the neighborhood apply at the same time, and if we get like 6 or 10 applications, then would that be dealt with one way? Or because this does not strike me as a huge amount of work. I don't know if it could fit in somewhere else or how that might be accomplished.
Would it be considered new, though, I guess, is the question?
Yeah,
because
it's an ongoing problem that really has only come to light in the last while. So it's an old problem that's newly to the agenda.
Well, might I suggest we'll put on the list, and I'll work with Mr. Blackwell and bring back something that, if there's a path forward to accomplish the key priorities, we'll bring that back. And Mr. Blackwell wants to provide some feedback on the approving officer and what some of that might entail. But can you be very brief, because we got someone needing to leave shortly?
Thank you.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you through you. So just so it's on your radar, there has been a request, as you know, to the province with respect to powers of for approving officer. I'm optimistic and would like to believe that it'll come anytime now with great news. Should that happen, there's a whole, if you think the body of work associated with the soils bylaw is significant, wait till you see what's involved with developing subdivision standards, preliminary layout approval letters, yada, 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 a whole lot of work. So we will move from, you know, over 100% capacity to somewhere over the top. That said, you should also, I should be reminded that there may well be, if you want to move on this approving officer thing, should the province authorize it, you're going to need to staff that. You're going to need to hire a development engineer, and perhaps even an eng tech to support that development engineer. So I just wanted to put that on your radar. It's not just these pieces. There's a huge potential juggernaut of work coming down the line.
Thank you. So we've got notes. We'll report back. I'm going to, is there anything that we have to discuss, Keith, on the maps? It's information only, right? Correct? Okay, then I'm going to go reorder things. Director Yanni Donardo, your new business, Couch and Bay cleanup. Can you have that loaded?
Beth was helping me on the computer, so can we go ahead without the last report, UB1? Okay.
Please.
Great. I just want to give some, I just received this today, and we had, Monday morning, we had done the community cleanup, and I really want to thank this board for helping Area D move forward with their charrette. It was a big job, and we had great consultants, and I'd like to thank once again Mr. Blackwell for his forward thinking on this, because I think that it was really good to shift us out of the way we've been doing things and to see the possibilities. So I really want to thank you for supporting this, and I wanted to share with you one of the outcomes. One of the outcomes was a working group, and this comes to the benefits of, like I said, having a filmmaker that volunteers in our community. So Nick Versteeg, thank you to Cheetah Slow Cowichan Bay. He's the president of Cheetah Slow, and wherever he goes, his camera goes. So this is a 2-minute clip on what we did. So I'd like to share that with you.
As a young counselor, I believe it's important for me to be out here and be visible, to have an understanding. If I'm asking you to understand my culture and my language.
So I'd like to give you this book for your whole family, for your grandkids. You're welcome.
So at the end of the cleanup day, everyone came back to share a meal with our neighbors. And in Cowichan Bay, we have the highest population of Cowichan tribes. So they came with their elders and we shared a meal. This is the grant and aid that Area D provided for this. And also like to share with you the great community volunteers and also the businesses that donated. But sharing with you the issues that we have, and it came out loud and clear in Cowichan Bay, is if you see the roads that we are cleaning. So it is a challenge, but they took it on, and that was the initial, and there's more to come, and I did give you the handouts as well. So thank you.
Thanks, and yeah, that deserves an applause. Just a note, and I can't remember which date, but I do believe we're going to be having our friends at Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure coming to talk to us about contractor, maintenance contractor standards and specifications in a couple of weeks, I think, or 3 weeks. Last item is UB1, and it's an information item. It's the maps that we didn't have accompanying the report from April 18th. And Keith is here because I think Mr. Tippett is somewhere across the ocean at a son's wedding? Yeah, in Japan, so. I guess I should ask, does anybody have any specific questions or thoughts or concerns about the maps? We've all had an opportunity to review them in advance. And this is information only that supplements that staff report, so. Keith, I'm not seeing a whole bunch of uptake on questions here. Is there anything that you want to make us aware of?
No, I have really nothing further to add. Thank you for that great introduction. You've said everything I wanted to say, but I can walk through. I have 15 maps presented. They're that are in your agenda package. The only reason that we brought this back, just for clarification, is that after the April 4th presentation, internally there was some discussion within the CVRD whether my 30,000 foot view of the mapping was adequate for the committee. So in advance of going to the board, we're bringing these 15 maps back. I can go through them very, very slowly, or very, very quickly, or not at all.
Or not at all.
Depending on
What's
your
the pleasure?
direction.
Director
And
Nicholson?
I have hard copies if that's required.
So my understanding is that the maps are so that we can understand what it would look like in our areas.
Yes, because in the past,
So-
I just identified the zones.
Yeah.
Was concerned that some people may not realize that zones are broken up over vast areas.
Right.
I want to give you the opportunity to see where they.
So when I looked at my maps of the industrial commercial areas, I noticed that if you, it would be helpful to separate production from retail in the bylaw. So some of my industrial suited retail, some of it suited production, but I don't think in any case did it suit both.
So specifically, am I deleting a permitted use from the zoning?
I don't think she can do that.
So when I looked at the Coxsila Business Park, I think retail could be entertained on a site-by-site basis. When I looked at the piece of commercial industrial property up near Bench Road, I thought that was more suited for production, to be considered for production, and not retail. And similarly, the industrial site that's out in Glenora at the end of Row Road. Production, not retail.
Just so I'm clear. Okay, sorry, I apologize. I do not have that in my back pocket to read out loud. But I'll just walk through it methodically. Map 104. So this is the Row Road. You would prefer to see only production. Map 2. These lands between Staghorn and Golfers. Production only. And there's two maps. So the north section of the business park, retailing only. Correct? And map 4, retailing only. Okay, I'm clear.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have questions for staff in regards to the maps? Director Davis.
Just to clarify, those are proposed cannabis zones and they're not zoned for that now.
Director Nicholson.
And just to clarify, they'll be subject to like rules about distance from schools and all that kind of stuff. So it's just proposed, it's not. meaning it will happen.
Director Davis.
I was just wondering if you'd had a more thorough look at what the province has proposed for those yet, and how these would be affected.
In terms of how they roll them out? Thank you. I haven't tried I've read them. I haven't incorporated any changes in the zoning bylaws, as you've seen.
Yeah, might I suggest that we stop, because this is just presenting maps for information. We shouldn't be diving into the guts of the bylaws. So, yeah, if there's gonna be changes, can staff ensure that the maps are coupled with the bylaw and that they be brought back with those changes and reflected in that? Great. Next item is, I believe, question period. We've done UB1, UB2. Done new business. Question period. Oh, I need my timer. It's Mr. Evans.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank the committee for endorsing the soil implementation plan. And I noted that some of the directors were concerned about the cost of this. I thought the idea of this plan was going to be it was cost neutral, that the permit fees would be adjusted to cover the complete cost of the plan. Is this not so, Mr. Chair?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Was
just the last part.
The cost of running the plan was supposed to be covered from the permit fees, and I thought that's the way that we were going to organize that if we needed more money, the fees would be probably adjusted accordingly. Is not the way we should be running this? It shouldn't be a cost to the resident taxpayer.
It's a reasonable question, but obviously there's startup costs and there's no fees coming in, so we had to front load some of this in order to launch the program, and the idea is that fees will be, it's anticipated that fees will be there to cover the cost of the program.
So, Mr. Chair, why can't we just write down what it's costed us and then adjust it accordingly so that we pay back the CVRD?
You lost me there.
We have hundreds of trucks coming over the Malahat every day. I think one time we did a calculation on the cost we could recover from the permit fees, and that was well over $1 million a year that we're missing out on. So I would think that would cover all our costs, including startup costs, not right away, but over the period.
So yeah, to answer your question, I think the staff were looking at reaching maybe not parity, but somewhere in the third year that we would have a closer idea of what our incomes would be. But there's no way to collect. The bylaw hasn't been approved. We don't have a means by which to resource it, so there will have to be resources drawn from what is in reserve and to start the program up.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I realize that we have to have some startup money, and I'm sure Mr. Conway will do a good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Would anyone else like to pose a question?
Mr. Chair. So one of the things I came here for today was regarding the dog bylaw. And I'm unclear after listening to the conversation when it might be anticipated that that would be addressed as is coming up for its 4th year in revision. So I've heard when you were discussing all of the problems of being overwhelmed with tasks and people being beyond capacity and so on, I did hear a quote that it should be put on the shelf. So can someone please respond to that?
I think we created a list of things that were priorities, and we're going to be coming back in a couple of weeks. There wasn't any discussion from what I heard as to a timeline for that specific one or any of the others. Did I hear? So we will know in a couple of weeks what is on the work plan and a timeline for most of those. But I can't answer you specifically on the dog
Okay,
bylaw.
so what I'm getting then is public safety a priority? So that's what I'm left with. So I hope that that is considered when you're going over things.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to pose a question?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. There's been a lot talked about today, and I was very interested in the conversation about priorities, short-term priorities for this committee and ultimately the board. From Area E standpoint, we have been more than 4 years in our OCP process, and a lot of that has been staff priorities, and staff priorities have been taken away from the Area E OCP development. But the Area E OCP development has been identified by this committee as being a priority. So can we have an update from the general manager about where our OCP is in our development and what we can expect for staff support in accomplishing our goal?
This is a question for through to the elected officials and the chair, and we don't put staff on the hook as far as questions from the public. So we will get an answer as far as an update to where your OCP is, and I'll provide that to you at the next meeting.
So we have to wait a further 2 weeks to get an update?
Yep.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? I think we've got room for one or two more. Seeing none, thank you very much. Can I have a resolution to go into closed session? Moved by Director Kuhn, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 5 minutes. Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo.